When my son Michael told me I wasn't welcome at his house for Christmas, I just smiled and reached for my coat. I could feel Isabella's eyes rolling, and the way she said, "Dad, really, just stay home," cut deeper than I expected. But what they didn't know. I had already set things in motion that would make them regret this arrogance. By the new year, their mortgage wouldn't just be delayed, it would be gone. Justice had its quiet way of arriving. You won't believe what happened next, so stay with me, and subscribe if you believe arrogance must be punished. I live in Naperville, Illinois, in a modest townhouse tucked behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges. Life these days is quiet. My mornings are spent walking Max, my golden retriever, through streets dusted with the crisp chill of winter, while evenings are for reading financial journals or checking on my small portfolio of investments. I've always preferred a life off the radar, understated calm, far from the high-rises of Chicago where I once spent decades in banking. Michael and Isabella, on the other hand, thrive on extravagance. Their Oak Brook house is massive, with Christmas lights that could probably be seen from the interstate. For 5 years, I've quietly paid their mortgage, helped with utility bills, and even funded renovations. I never asked for thanks. I thought family was its own reward. But lately, I'd started noticing little things that nagged at me, foreshadowing, as it turns out, for what was to come. Last month, the HOA sent me a notice about a vehicle of concern parked near their driveway. It was just my old Ford, but Isabella must have freaked out seeing it there. And a week before Christmas, a package from the IRS arrived at my mailbox by mistake. Nothing alarming, just some paperwork, but it made me realize how often I had been invisible in their lives. I'm a man of habit and patience. I've always been meticulous, whether managing a $100 million bank portfolio or keeping my 401k growth steady. Yet, living in a quiet town like Naperville, my neighbors only see me as the friendly retiree walking a dog, never suspecting the life I left behind. And that's exactly how I wanted it, for a while. I've learned that silence is a kind of power, though I didn't realize I would soon need to wield it. Little breadcrumbs were falling everywhere. The cheap scarf Isabella gave me last Thanksgiving, the way the neighbors whispered about my car, even Emily from next door noticing me reviewing documents late into the night. All trivial at first glance, but each a tiny hint that the world wasn't ready to see me rise from obscurity. That Christmas Eve, I drove to their Oak Brook estate, carrying a small gift and a folder of documents no one would expect. I knocked, hearing the festive music leak through the door. Michael's voice came first, sharp, impatient, "Dad, about time." And then Isabella's, cold and dismissive, "We really don't need you here this year." As I stood there, the snow crunching beneath my boots, I knew one thing: the quiet life was over. And what they didn't know was that every payment, every favor I'd ever given, was about to turn into leverage. That Christmas Eve, standing in the foyer of Michael and Isabella's Oak Brook mansion, I felt more like an intruder than a father. The air smelled of pine, peppermint, and freshly baked cookies, but I didn't enjoy it. Michael barely glanced at me. "Dad, you can leave the gifts over there," he said, pointing vaguely toward a side table like I was a delivery person. And Isabella? She was already scrolling through her phone, tossing comments over her shoulder like daggers. "You shouldn't have bothered coming," she said casually, the words wrapped in a tone so condescending it could have cut through steel. "It's not like you actually pay attention to us anymore." I blinked. Pay attention? I'd paid their mortgage, funded renovations, even covered Max's vet bills when they weren't around. I'd watched silently as their HOA fined them for trimming the hedges wrong or leaving the mailbox crooked. I had quietly dealt with contractors, ensuring their house stayed perfect, while they lived in blissful ignorance. And now this. The humiliation didn't stop there. As we sat for dinner, Michael made a show of how busy he was at work, pulling out his laptop in the middle of the meal, typing away while Isabella rolled her eyes at my attempts to engage. She passed me the mashed potatoes with a smirk and said, "You know, Dad, some of us actually have careers. Maybe focus on your crossword puzzles instead." I forced a smile, but inside, the embarrassment stung. I faced market crashes, hostile takeovers, and ruthless board meetings in my career, but nothing quite like being dismissed by your own family in front of the table, as if I were a visitor with no stake in the room. And it didn't end with words. Later, as the evening wore on, Isabella decided I wasn't even worth a seat for the annual Christmas gift exchange. I was shuffled to the corner, where the lights barely reached, while she unveiled extravagant presents for friends and colleagues. One of them, a Tiffany bracelet for Emily from the marketing department, was so over the top that Michael clapped and whistled, laughing as if the humiliation of his father was part of the fun. I kept my composure outwardly, nodding and smiling, all the while thinking of every payment, every favor I'd quietly made over the years. Each one had been an investment in family trust, and now, apparently, it was worthless. They had no gratitude, no acknowledgement, and worst of all, no sense of proportion. The final straw came when Michael raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, his eyes narrowing toward me, "even when they don't quite fit in." Everyone laughed, and Isabella added, "Yeah, Dad, maybe next year just send a card." I could feel my chest tighten. It was more than disrespect, it was betrayal. I'd sacrificed comfort, peace of mind, even part of my retirement, to keep their lives smooth. And here they were, treating me like a joke in front of their friends, flaunting their material success, and mocking my presence as if it were a nuisance. By the end of the night, I was quietly seething. I excused myself under the pretense of checking on Max at my car, stepping into the snowy driveway. The cold wind bit at my face, but it didn't compare to the chill in my heart. The injustice was palpable. I had given them the world, yet in their eyes, I was an afterthought, a relic of a past life that had no value. Driving home, I passed the mailbox where the IRS letter had been mistakenly delivered weeks before. That minor inconvenience suddenly seemed like a breadcrumb, a tiny reminder that I could affect the system, and not just observe it quietly anymore. The injustice fueled something in me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The years of silence, of letting others assume my life was ordinary, had led me to this moment. And I realized that the world, my world, the one I could control, was about to shift dramatically. That night, as I poured a glass of bourbon and looked over the lights of Naperville twinkling in the distance, I made a decision. No longer would I be ignored, belittled, or humiliated. I had quietly amassed resources, knowledge, and connections that even Michael and Isabella couldn't imagine. And soon, they would learn the consequences of arrogance. The injustice of the evening had planted the seed. Their disrespect, their casual cruelty, had given me the fuel I needed. By the next week, the first moves of my plan would begin, and they would be shocked at just how powerless they truly were. I had been their silent benefactor, but now, I would be their reckoning. Little did they know, the mortgage I'd helped sustain for years was about to become the instrument of my subtle, inevitable, and utterly satisfying revenge. A week later, I found myself back in Naperville, sipping my morning coffee on the patio, watching the frost melt from the rooftops. Everything seemed calm, mundane even, but appearances are deceiving. That calm was my ally, giving me the perfect cover as I quietly pulled threads no one suspected existed. It started with a call from the bank. I'd contacted an old friend, Greg Lawson, a senior mortgage officer at their lender, who owed me a favor from years ago when we'd collaborated on a corporate acquisition. Greg's voice was calm, almost amused. "Are you sure about this, Carol?" he asked. "I mean, it's highly unusual, and well, your son and daughter-in-law, I'm sure," I interrupted, letting a hint of steel edge my voice. "Their mortgage is fully in my control. You know what to do." I hung up, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. A breadcrumb from my setup had quietly fallen into place. Remember that IRS letter that arrived at their house by mistake? It turned out Michael had ignored it, assuming it was spam. But that tiny mishap had given me leverage. By confirming ownership stakes and payment histories, I had the authority to intervene without raising red flags. That afternoon, I went to my HMA meeting, ostensibly to discuss some fence repairs. The women gossiping about the fancy cars Michael and Isabella were showing off again had no idea their idle chatter would later serve as fuel for my plan. One neighbor mentioned the new Tesla in the driveway, another complained about Isabella blocking the sidewalk during holiday decorations. Little details, seemingly insignificant, now glinted like breadcrumbs, leading me to my first small twist. Then came the unexpected encounter. Isabella herself showed up at the community coffee shop, laughing with a group of friends, clearly mocking a mishap Michael had at work. She waved at me, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind, and tossed a casual, "Still thinking about Christmas, Dad?" I froze for a moment, not because of fear, but because the irony hit me. She had no idea that the very tools she thought were hers, control over the house, mortgage, HOA influence, were subtly slipping out of her grasp. The small twist was already in motion, and I allowed a slow, deliberate smile to cross my face, savoring the moment. Later that evening, I ran into Greg again. "It's done," he said, barely concealing a grin. "Starting next month, their mortgage payments. Let's just say, you've taken over responsibility." I laughed quietly, the sound soft but victorious. That tiny, almost invisible action, a subtle twist, was my first real taste of power. I had initiated change without confrontation, without raising suspicion. Michael and Isabella still thought they were untouchable, still laughed, still mocked, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had started to shift. That night, as I reviewed my email and double-checked every transaction, I reflected on the breadcrumbs I'd left. The small details, the IRS letter, the HOA gossip, the minor miscommunications, had all added up. They had no idea how observant I'd been over the years, quietly building leverage in plain sight. Even my old friend Greg, a man deeply enmeshed in corporate and banking law, commented on the elegance of the move. "Carol, you've set this up perfectly," he said. "It's subtle, legal, and completely irreversible. They won't see it coming." I couldn't help but think back to that Christmas Eve, the humiliation, the blatant disrespect, and how it had fueled this first twist. The injustice had been the spark, the small details the kindling. And now, with the first domino tipping, the path toward total reversal was set. By the end of that day, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in decades. It was exhilarating, almost addictive, the power of subtle influence, the thrill of planning something so audacious and watching it unfold without anyone suspecting. And as I turned off my laptop and stepped out onto my snowy porch, I knew this was just the beginning. The light twist had given me momentum. The full revelation, the past reveal and ultimate reversal were still to come, and Michael and Isabella were completely blind to it. They thought they'd won. But what they didn't know was that the first small ripple had already set a tsunami in motion. And soon the consequences of their arrogance would hit them, quietly, legally, and utterly devastatingly. Sitting by the fireplace that evening, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The snow outside glistened under the street lamps, a serene contrast to the storm of memories stirring within me. It was time to tell the story no one knew, the story that explained why I had tolerated years of disrespect, why I had remained invisible in Michael and Isabella's lives until now. Years ago, I had been someone very different. My name is Carol Bennett, 58 years old, a former corporate attorney turned financial consultant. I lived in Naperville, Illinois, in a modest brick townhouse, but back in my heyday, I was navigating boardrooms in Chicago, wielding influence in mergers and acquisitions worth tens of millions. I had power, prestige, and a sharp mind that few could match. But life has a way of teaching humility, and revenge sometimes, in lessons disguised as setbacks. I had married young, to a man named Robert, who seemed charming at first but was ultimately controlling and self-centered. We had Michael, my son, and while I loved him dearly, raising him under Robert's shadow meant navigating a world where my voice was often silenced. When Robert passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack 15 years ago, I was left to pick up the pieces, not only of my family but also of the tangled financial empire we had accumulated. At that point, I had choices. I could have sold everything, retreated into a quiet life, and been content with a modest 401k and a few investments. But instead, I decided to step back into the financial world, not with brash ambition, but with precision. Over the years, I built an intricate network of contacts in banking, law, and corporate finance. I knew every loophole, every clause, every obscure regulation that most people wouldn't dare study. That knowledge became my shield, my weapon, my quiet power. Michael, meanwhile, had grown up with a sense of entitlement, believing that his father's wealth and my quiet lifestyle were his by right. Isabella, his wife, a former marketing executive from Denver, shared that same arrogance. They thought I was just the nice, passive mom who would fund holidays and babysit grandchildren while staying in the background. That perception, I realized, was my greatest advantage. A breadcrumb from my earlier life had started to emerge innocuously, the misplaced IRS letter I had mentioned before. Years of meticulously tracking my investments and corporate connections had paid off. That letter, seemingly meaningless to them, confirmed their assumption that I was just their mom. In reality, it allowed me to access crucial information about their mortgage ownership and payment status without tipping anyone off. I remember the night I first discovered Isabella's obsession with appearances. She had invited me to a superficial dinner under the guise of family bonding. Michael was absorbed in his new luxury car and the house renovation. Isabella, sipping her overpriced Chardonnay, made a sly comment. "Mom, you always know how to stay invisible. That's probably why you have nothing exciting in your life, huh?" I smiled politely, but inside, the gears began turning. That was the spark, the reminder that arrogance can blind people to the obvious. I let them continue, quietly documenting, quietly planning. The seed for today's events was planted that night. Small humiliations, little dismissals, each one feeding into a larger strategy that they had no idea I was building. Years of consulting had honed my analytical mind. I had once advised Fortune 500 CEOs, navigated multi-state regulations, and drafted contracts that could make or break entire corporations. But I never flaunted it at home. To Michael and Isabella, I appeared ordinary, compliant, even somewhat naive. That misperception allowed me to remain unnoticed while quietly preparing a plan that could shift the balance of power completely. Even my neighbors had unknowingly contributed to my preparation. HOA meetings, gossiping about their expensive cars or holiday decorations, gave me insight into their lifestyle and priorities. Every small detail, the way Isabella drove to the country club, how Michael ignored bills, the casual arrogance with which they spoke about family obligations, became threads I could later weave into leverage. Then came a revelation that cemented everything. My old corporate partner, Gregory Lawson, had been secretly monitoring some of their financial moves at my request. I hadn't needed to raise suspicion because Greg was discreet, and their hubris ensured they'd never suspect interference. The breadcrumbs from the setup, the HOA complaints, the minor IRS miscommunications, the neighborhood whispers, all converged to give me access to their mortgage records legally, ethically, but with a sting of poetic justice. As I recount this, it's clear why I had tolerated their mistreatment. It was strategic patience. I knew that arrogance breeds mistakes, and mistakes create opportunity. By allowing Michael and Isabella to underestimate me, to dismiss me entirely, I had set the stage for the ultimate reversal. Each snide remark, each exclusion from family gatherings, each thinly veiled insult during holidays was meticulously logged in my memory, like chapters in a play I was directing from the shadows. The realization hit me vividly on that cold December morning, just after their Christmas snub. I had not just been a passive bystander, I had been quietly orchestrating their comeuppance. That week, while Michael and Isabella were celebrating their imagined victory, I had already initiated the first domino of my plan, canceling their mortgage payments through the legal channels I had carefully lined up over months. By now, the audience sees the significance of every small breadcrumb. The IRS letters, the HOA gossip, the neighborhood whispers, even Isabella's cheap scarf at that one awkward dinner, they were all puzzle pieces forming a complete picture. And in the past reveal, the truth became undeniable. I was never powerless. I had simply been invisible, like an iceberg hiding immense mass beneath the surface. That invisibility was my weapon. And now, with Michael and Isabella blissfully unaware, it allowed me to execute the first wave of my plan perfectly. The injustice of being excluded from Christmas wasn't just a personal blow, it was the ignition for a masterful sequence that would leave them stunned, exposed, and powerless. Sitting by the fire, I realized how essential that past was. Without my corporate experience, without the strategic patience honed over years, without understanding American mortgage law and financial regulations, I could never have executed this subtle, yet devastating, act of justice. It wasn't luck, it was preparation, foresight, and an intimate understanding of the system they thought they controlled. And that's when it hit me, the stage was fully set. The breadcrumbs had aligned, the legal leverage was in place, and the first small twist had already begun to ripple through their lives. Soon the reversal would come, not just as a lesson, but as a dramatic, undeniable spectacle. The past had revealed the truth. I was not the invisible, powerless figure they believed me to be. I had been calculating, patient, and entirely in control, waiting for the moment when their arrogance would provide the perfect opening. And that moment had arrived. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting long stripes across the living room floor, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Michael and Isabella had no idea the ground beneath them was about to shift. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into my hands, and allowed a small, satisfied smile to curl across my lips. For years, I had been dismissed, ignored, underestimated, but today, everything would change. It began with a simple phone call. Using the legal authority I had meticulously secured during the past few weeks, I contacted the bank handling their mortgage. My voice was calm, polite, utterly innocuous, but the effect of my words would be seismic. "I am calling regarding the Bennett mortgage account," I said. Please ensure that the next several payments are voided and apply all credits accordingly. The bank representative, unfamiliar with the full legal documents I had prepared, simply followed procedure. In less than an hour, their monthly obligation, $200 a month, mind you, was legally suspended. They wouldn't see a bill coming, but the notice of adjustment would eventually arrive, with consequences they couldn't anticipate. I knew I had to pace the drama carefully. Michael was at his office in downtown Naperville, probably bragging about his new car to colleagues, while Isabella was managing a Black Friday promotional campaign for her boutique marketing firm. They were both out of the house, completely oblivious, which was perfect. My first mini cliffhanger was set in motion without a single confrontation. By lunchtime, the ripple effect began. I stopped by a nearby coffee shop, pretending to casually run errands, when my phone buzzed. It was Gregory, my old corporate partner who had helped me uncover the vulnerabilities in their finances. They just got the first alert, he whispered, barely containing a chuckle. They're going to freak out when they see what's happening with their mortgage. My pulse quickened, not out of excitement, but a deep satisfaction born of long-delayed justice. Later that afternoon, I made a subtle appearance at their HOA holiday event. This wasn't to confront them directly, but to be present, to watch the first sparks of their confusion ignite in real time. Neighbors whispered, curious about my sudden interest in social gatherings after years of keeping a low profile. Isabella spotted me immediately, her eyes narrowing. "Carol, what are you doing here?" she demanded, clearly uncomfortable in front of the community. Michael, trying to save face, added, "Yeah, Mom. I thought you weren't coming to anything this year." I smiled sweetly, letting the calm confidence radiate naturally. "I thought I'd drop by. It's such a lovely neighborhood, isn't it?" My tone was innocent, but the tension in the air was palpable. A small breadcrumb. They didn't yet know that the calm, invisible Carol Bennett they had dismissed had just taken control of their most significant financial obligation. By evening, the first tangible reactions began. Michael called me, his voice tight, a mixture of anger and panic. "Mom, what did you do? There's something wrong with the bank, our mortgage." I feigned confusion, tilting my head. "Mortgage? I'm not sure what you mean, dear. Everything seems fine from my end." His frustration escalated. Isabella's voice joined the call shortly after, sharp and accusatory. "Carol, this isn't funny. You can't just..." But I let them stumble over their words, their composure cracking with each revelation. Every accusation, every demand, was music to my ears because it meant they were finally grasping the reality. The quiet, invisible mom was not powerless. I had turned the tables entirely, leveraging patience, foresight, and knowledge of the American financial system to execute a masterstroke of justice. The true reversal, however, came during the community Christmas gala. I arrived late, as if by chance, carrying a modest gift for the local charity raffle. Neighbors greeted me warmly, commenting on my success with subtle admiration. But the real show began when Michael and Isabella were called to the stage to speak as outstanding community members, an event they had been planning to highlight their status. As they made their way up, I casually mentioned in conversation with the event organizer about their recent financial hiccups, framing it as a casual remark without any malicious intent. The organizer, unaware of the underlying dynamics, passed on the comment. Within minutes, whispers filled the room, and I could see Isabella's confident demeanor falter. Michael's cheeks flushed as he glanced at me, realizing that their public image, and their private financial blunder, was now intertwined. Later that night, alone in their study, Michael discovered the formal notice from the bank, detailing the cancellation of multiple mortgage payments and outlining the legal implications if funds were not restored. Panic set in. "Isabella, Carol did this. She actually did this," he exclaimed, disbelief coloring every syllable. Isabella, mortified, could only shake her head. "This is impossible. She can't, how did she even?" Meanwhile, I watched from a discreet distance, enjoying the emotional punch of my reversal. They were publicly embarrassed, privately panicked, and utterly powerless to undo what had been done. The arrogance that had once blinded them to my presence was now exposed as hubris, and every snide comment, every dismissive remark, every holiday slight came back to haunt them. But the ultimate satisfaction came in the following days when the legal documentation fully processed. Their mortgage lender contacted them with formal confirmation. Multiple months of payments had been canceled, adjustments made, and a formal review scheduled. They scrambled, seeking advisors and lawyers, only to discover that the actions I had taken were entirely legal, backed by documentation and executed within regulatory compliance. Every attempt to reverse it failed. Through it all, I remained calm, poised, and subtly amused. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the passive, invisible mother. They were finally learning the consequences of arrogance and disrespect. The reversal was complete, orchestrated with precision, patience, and strategic foresight. The audience sees the emotional payoff, the once dismissive son and daughter-in-law now scrambling, humiliated, and shocked, while I, the quiet observer, stand firmly in control, delivering justice in the most calculated yet satisfying way possible. And so, the stage was set for the final act. The lessons they needed to learn were clear, their sense of entitlement shattered, and my own empowerment fully realized. The reversal wasn't just about canceling a mortgage, it was about reclaiming dignity, asserting intelligence, and demonstrating that patience and planning could turn invisibility into unstoppable force. The winter night in Naperville was calm, the streets dusted with fresh snow, twinkling Christmas lights reflecting softly off the sidewalks. But inside the Bennett house, chaos reigned. Michael and Isabella were still reeling from the shock of their mortgage cancellation, their arrogance stripped away like a holiday wrapping paper revealing an empty box. I had watched their panic unfold with quiet satisfaction, but tonight, it was time to complete the final act, justice and empowerment, not just for myself, but as a lesson they would never forget. I arrived at their doorstep under the guise of neighborly concern, carrying a small gift bag of cookies for the holiday potluck. Michael opened the door, his face pale, still shaken. Isabella hovered behind him, arms crossed, bracing for confrontation. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Michael asked, voice trembling. I smiled softly, letting my calm confidence speak louder than words. "I thought I'd check in," I said casually. "Make sure everyone's okay with all the holiday surprises." It was a subtle reminder. The word surprises hung in the air, heavy with implication. They both stiffened, realizing this was not a social visit but a calculated presence. I stepped inside, as if invited, my posture relaxed, radiating authority. Their home, once a symbol of their success and superiority, now felt like a stage where they had no control. I didn't need to raise my voice. I let the truth speak for itself. "I know the mortgage notice must have been unsettling," I began, keeping my tone gentle yet firm. "But the point isn't about money. It's about respect. About understanding that actions have consequences." I could see Michael squirm under the weight of my words, Isabella biting her lip, both now painfully aware that their previous behavior, excluding me from Christmas, treating me as insignificant, had led to this moment. The breadcrumbs I had planted months ago, carefully monitored bank accounts, subtle community remarks, even casual conversations with HWA members, had culminated in this revelation. Michael's first instinct was to argue, to defend himself, but the law and strategy left no room for denial. Every tactic they might try to reverse the situation had been anticipated and neutralized. Then came the final mini cliffhanger. A letter arrived from their mortgage lender, hand-delivered by the HWA's property manager. Michael snatched it up, scanning the document with disbelief. Every single payment for the last 3 months had been canceled legally, with detailed explanations referencing my authority as co-signer and executor of specific legal documents they had ignored. Their faces turned ashen. Isabella whispered, This can't be legal." I simply nodded, allowing the weight of legality to sink in. I took a seat, maintaining a calm demeanor, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "It is legal," I confirmed. "Every step, every decision, properly documented. But legality aside, the lesson is clear: disrespect and exclusion have consequences." As they digested the reality, I noticed a subtle shift. Michael's defensiveness softened into reflection, Isabella's irritation into reluctant acknowledgement. They began to see the pattern they had failed to recognize. My quiet patience, my strategic invisibility, had been misinterpreted as weakness. That misconception was their downfall. In the days that followed, their approach toward me changed completely. Holiday invitations, previously withheld, now arrived with genuine warmth. Apologies were offered, tentative at first, but sincere. Michael even admitted privately, "Mom, I never understood how capable you were. I misjudged you." Isabella added, "I let my arrogance blind me. I'm sorry." Their humility, though late, was genuine. I didn't gloat. My satisfaction came from witnessing the shift in power and perspective, from seeing the lessons internalized. I had reclaimed my dignity, asserted my intellect, and restored justice, all without resorting to anger or rash confrontation. The empowerment wasn't just about canceling a mortgage, it was about asserting presence, intelligence, and moral authority in a world that had dismissed me. By Christmas morning, the atmosphere was transformed. The tension had melted into cautious warmth, neighbors exchanged holiday greetings, and I, once sidelined and ignored, now stood as a respected figure in the community and within my family. I had not only reclaimed my own voice but had subtly reshaped the dynamics, ensuring mutual respect going forward. The final takeaway was clear: empowerment comes from patience, knowledge, and strategic action. Justice is not always loud, it can be quiet, precise, and undeniable. And arrogance, when left unchecked, eventually meets consequences. As I watched Michael and Isabella interact with neighbors, smiling awkwardly but earnestly, I felt a deep sense of closure. I had taught them, and perhaps reminded myself, that dignity and respect are not granted, they are earned and defended. In the end, the Bennett family Christmas wasn't just saved, it was transformed, turning humiliation into education, dismissal into awareness, and invisibility into undeniable presence. Justice had been served. Empowerment had been reclaimed. And for the first time in years, I felt fully seen, fully respected, and fully in control. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that happened, one thing is crystal clear: respect is never optional, and dignity is never something anyone should take away from you. Life has a way of testing patience, humility, and resilience, but it also gives us the tools to reclaim what's rightfully ours. In my case, it was more than just canceling a mortgage. It was reclaiming my voice, my presence, and my self-worth in a world that had tried to silence me. Family is complicated. Love doesn't always mean respect, and blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. I learned that being quiet and patient doesn't make you weak, it makes you strategic. Waiting, observing, and understanding the full picture before acting allows you to turn situations around in ways that are not only powerful but irreversible. Michael and Isabella needed a wake-up call, not just a slap on the wrist. They had to realize that arrogance, entitlement, and exclusion come with real consequences. And sometimes, the consequences are beautifully unexpected. This isn't just about revenge, it's about empowerment. It's about knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone belittle you, manipulate you, or erase you from your own life. It's about taking control of what you can, whether that's legal authority, financial power, or simply your presence and voice in relationships that matter. Life in America teaches us the value of independence and self-advocacy, but it also reminds us that toxic patterns, whether in family, work, or community, must be confronted. And when you do confront them wisely, justice and respect naturally follow. So if there's one thing I want anyone watching this to remember, it's this: never underestimate the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who smile while the world underestimates them. Because when they act, the results are unforgettable. As I watched my family finally see me, not as a shadow, but as a force, they learned that underestimating someone's worth is the gravest mistake anyone can make. As I like to say now, arrogance may build a house, but respect builds a legacy. And if you ever forget that, remember this: sometimes, the smallest call can have the biggest consequences. If you've been inspired or reminded of your own strength, hit that subscribe button now. Don't let anyone ever make you feel invisible. Stand tall, take control, and always demand the respect you deserve.